The following is a reading of a news article published in Liverpool Mercury, Tuesday 15th May 1877. Mr. Gladstone on Montenegro. The current number of 19th century contains a powerful paper on the pen of Mr. Gladstone, following an equally powerful sonnet by Mr. Tennyson, in praise of the tenacity and heroism with which the hardy race of Montenegrins have 5 centuries clung to their freedom and beaten back the successive hordes of Turkish invaders who have attempted their conquest. The story is one, indeed, which can hardly be told in the plainest term without, as Mr. Gladstone says, begetting in the mind of the reader a resistless suspicion of exaggeration or fable.
The vast cyclone of Ottoman conquest,
to use his own words,
the most formidable that the world has ever seen, having crossed the narrow sea from Asia in the 14th century, made rapid advances westward, and blasted by the successive acquisitions the fortunes of countries the chief part of which were amongst the most civilized, Italy alone excepted, all of Europe.
Leaving the Hellenic land out of question, Bulgaria, Serbia, as now known, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Albania were successfully overwhelmed, but the tide of invasion was restlessly hurled back when it reached the flourishing Principality of Zeta. This little state comprised of territory now known as Montenegro, or in the local language, Crna Gora, together with the seaward frontier and with the rich and fair plains encircling the irregular outline of the Black Mountain, Montenegro itself. Land after land had given way, but Zeta stood firm until 1484, when Ivan Czernovich, the Czernogorian hero of the day, had pressed on all sides, and refused to help by the Venetians, to whom he had often aided. Quieted with his people, the sunny tracts in which they had basked for some 700 years, and sought on the rocks and amid the precipices, certi for the 2 gifts by far the most precious to mankind, their faith and their freedom. It was open to them to purchase a debasing peace by accepting the Koran or submitting to slavery, but to these alternatives they preferred a life of cold, want, hardship, and perpetual peril.
Such,
says Mr. Gladstone,
is their Magna Carta, and without reproach to others, it is, as far as I know, the noblest in the world.
They rose, writes Mr. Tennyson.
They rose to where their sovereign eagle sails, they kept their faith, their freedom on the height, cast frugal, savage, armed by day and night, against the Turk whose inroad nowhere scales. Their headlong passes, but his footstep fails, and red with blood the crescent reels from fight before their dauntless hundreds in prone flight, by thousands down the crage and through the vales.
As a centre for his mountain home, Ivan built a monastery at Cetinje, which he declared to be the new metropolis, and, what is most of all remarkable, within 7 years after Saxton had printed his first volume, and 28 years after appearance of the earliest printed book, he carried with him into the halls a printing press. Then and there the little brotherhood voted unanimously the fundamental law that in time of wars against the Turk, no son of Crna Gora should quit the field without the order of his chief, and that runways, after being dressed in female clothing, should be hunted out of the sanctuary of freedom by the women with their distaffs.
And, says Mr. Gladstone, for 4 centuries, wanting only 7 years, they have maintained in full force the covenant of that awful day, through an unbroken series of trials, of dangers and exploits to which it is hard to find a parallel in the annals of Europe, perhaps even of mankind.
We will not attempt to follow Mr. Gladstone through his brilliant sketch of the history of this 400-year-old heroism in the Black Mountain. It is the history of a brave and stalwart race, of simple life, great piety, high morality, and severe discipline, willing enough to dwell in peace with all men, but resenting the invasion of the Turk upon their liberties with deadly intensity and bloody retribution. Never aggressive, they were like a tiger with young when assailed. Their laws amongst themselves in open assembly of the people, and were administered for the most part by the prince, who was also their chief priest and their leader in war. Treachery was an unpardonable sin, and there was little of it. What relegates their exploits to the region of the wonderful is the numerical weakness of the community which held fast its oasis of Christianity and freedom amidst the dry and boundless desert of the Ottoman domination. About 1600 AD, there are said to have been around 8,000 fighting men in Montenegro, a number which, as the military age is from 12 to 50, would give a population of not more than 30,000. About 1800, this population had risen to 55,000. In 1825 to 75,000, in 1835 to 100,000, and in 1865 to 196,000.
While, writes Mr. Gladstone, the gross population of Montenegro in men, women, and children was slowly growing through 3 centuries from 30,000 to their present number, we must inquire with curiosity what amount of Turkish force had been deemed by the Porte equal to the enterprise of attacking the mountain. And here, strange as it may seem, history proves it to have seemed general rule not to attack Montenegro except with armies equaling or exceeding, sometimes doubling or more, in numbers of all men, women, and children that is contained.
In 1712, a force of estimated as numbering between 50,000 and 100,000 men crossed the Zeta between Podgorica and Spur. The Vladika Danilo assailed their camp before dawn with an army in 3 divisions, which could hardly have reached 12,000 men, and, with a loss of 318, slew the lowest estimated 20,000. In 1722, the Turks attacked them in 20,000 men under Hussein Pasha. 1,000 Montenegrins discomfited the host and took the general prisoner. In 1727 and 1732, similar attacks were similarly met. In 1768, an army, variously estimated at 67,000, 100,000 and even 180,000 men, invaded the mountain. The Montenegrin force of 10,000 or 12,000 was, as ever, ready for the fight. But the Venetians, in obedience to the Porte, prohibited the entry of munitions, of was
utter ruin, says Mr. Gladstone, seemed now, as the length of the overhanged them, a cartridge was worth a ducat, such was their necessity, when 500 of their men attacked a Turkish division, and all fear had vanished. They assailed before dawn the united forces of the Pashas of Rommel from the south of Bosnia from the north. Again, they effected the scarcely credible slaughter of 20,000 Turks, with 3,000 horses, and won an incredible booty of colours, arms, munitions, and baggage.
Passing to more modern times, Mr. Gladstone remarks truly enough that during recent war from July-October 1876, we hear much of the Turkish victories over the Servian army composed principally of peasants, put suddenly into the ranks, with assaulting of real soldiers, but very little in comparison of their failures and defeats in conflict with Montenegro. A German observer, Herr Gopchevich, supplies the deficiency. On the 28th of July, the men of Czarnagora defeated Mukhtar Pasha, killing 4,000 Turks with loss of only 70 Montenegrins. Osman Pasha was taken, Salim was among the slain. Within 3 weeks, the medium 20,000 Turks were defeated, with a loss of 4,700, slain by 5,000 Montenegrins. On the 6th of September, 5 battalions of Montenegrins, numbering 800 each, defeated Derivac Pasha, and slew 3,000 of his men. On the 6th of September, 5 battalions of Montenegrins, numbering 800 each, defeated Derivac Pasha, and slew 3,000 of his men. On 2 subsequent occasions, Mukhtar Pasha with 18,000 men was signally defeated, and on the 20th of October, Medun was taken by the men of Tsarnagora, and the Ottoman general fled to Scutari, leaving garrisons in Spur and Podgorica. When the armistice arrested the course of the disaster, the southern army under Dervish Pasha has been reduced from 45,000 to 20,000, and the northern army under Mukhtar from 35,000 to 18,000, while the Montenegrins had lost only 1,000 men, and had captured from their enemies with much besides 12,000 breech loaders and 1,500 horses.
So much,
says Mr. Gladstone, with a not unprovoked parting shot at Mr. Wardhunt,
for the indomitable pluck of the Turks which has since moved the enthusiastic admiration of the British minister.